Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good morning, depending on where you are. I would like to welcome all of you to this event, the Festival of Sustainable Development that is underway here in Italy and the University of Padua. Let's talk about Ocultados, the uncontacted peoples in the Amazon forest. And we're doing it with Milagros Aguirre, who wrote a book on the issue. There are more than 700 of these peoples worldwide, and in some cases they are repressed, and they are the most vulnerable populations in the planet. And there are also and they are also examples of alliances between man and nature, utmost example of sustainability. They live in Papua New Guinea, in South America, Bolivia, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru, Venezuela. It's important to see these definitions of isolated people. There is a UN document giving guidelines for these peoples drafted by the High Commissioner of the UN for Human Rights. In some countries, they are known as free, uncontacted, invisible, hidden peoples or involuntary isolation. Despite the various definitions, they all refer to the same concept, that of isolation. Isolation is a survival strategy, and it's not the intention of these peoples. Let's see a specific case of one of these populations, and we will do it with Milagros Aguirre, who was a journalist, writer, researcher, activist, and editor-in-chief, who since 2016 has worked with papers like Hoy and Apio Ecuador, and has published various books. And she's also the founder of the Doreyana Archaeological Museum. She wrote various books in 2004, one in 2006, and in 2020, and then a last book on the healthcare issue concerning the pandemic and the consequences on these indigenous populations. She also wrote other books. One, Aquí le importa esta vida. One, La Selva de Papel. Another book on isolated population. And in 2013, she wrote a book, Una tragedia occultada. On the topic, she wrote various articles on various papers, such as La Guerra Sin Tregua, en Cuadernos de Investigación, Se Tierra Círculo del Exterminio. She wrote it in the paper Derechos Humanos, and then an article in the book L'ultimo grito del Jaguar, and then another article on Ecuador in a volume. She does an important scientific work because we need to learn facts, because in international courts, facts are discussed, documented facts. So, Milagro, welcome. We would like to thank you for being here. Let's start talking about your latest book, Ocultados, and the reason why you chose this word, Ocultados, and not occulto, because there is an international process that hides the visibility of these peoples. But before we talk about the book, I would like to know how you approach this topic that has you've been dealing with for more than 20 years. Thank you, Massimo. Thank you for inviting me. Much appreciated. And thank you all for being connected here with us. I would like to thank greatly all of you for the interest you showed in this topic, which is a hot debated topic while being very challenging. From my part, I'm pleased to share with you what represents my desperation, because for me this topic has touched many personal moments of my life, and it caused a lot of pain to me as well. What is happening in the Ecuatorian forest is a tragedy, as well as what is happening to these groups of human beings, which are disappearing, just like their forest, the knowledge on the forest. But how did we get to this point? I believe there are several reasons for this. Because I used to work at Comercio, a paper for which I used to work as a journalist, cultural journalist. And once we got a gossip for the gossip column. There seemed to have been deaths in the forest. It was 2003. I had received the news from some colleagues, and then I called the missionaries, because I had interviewed a few years ago Miguel Angel Capodevilla, who had written about occultos, and I knew that he was very knowledgeable with the topic. And then in the Cappuccini's orders, Monsignor Alejandro Lavaca had been lynched in the forest many years before. And Capodevilla had told me about this event, and it sounded very familiar because I was starting my career as a journalist. I was still studying when I learned about the death of a person that my father had met during a trek in the forest. The forest was an invisible place. People always say that Ecuador is a legend, and we would like to learn answers about the Ecuatorian forest. So I thought it would be interesting to start studying the topic. So I learned about these deaths, and I asked the editor-in-chief to let me investigate, because I was attracted by this piece of news. I was very curious. I had already read a lot about Alejandro Lavaca. I had read about these populations. The first contacts were in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and that's when I started following this story. Since then, as you will see, if you read my book, the latest one, I developed an obsession for this topic, because I started writing many stories, many articles on this topic. And every now and then I got the news where someone had died in the forest, and other news came, more news came, and I was curious. So the previous books, and I would like to stress this, the previous books focused on this tragedy of Ocultados. And these books were meaning to express sort of with report the old books where some books reporting the slaughter going on in the forest. But with this book, I would like to share something more personal and more emotional, because after many years of writing books and articles, after all these years, I felt a bit defeated. I felt as if I had lost a battle, because I think that this topic is not yet felt. So the fact that I wrote this personal book, personal chronicle, because it is linked to my personal experience. And I think it's another way to put these facts in context from the point of view of journalism, as well as from my personal point of view, which is different from the academia and from the investigations. So this is a storytelling, a very personal storytelling, mentioning some of the things that I had already written and that I keep repeating within my professional life. And it's also a sort of personal closure, symbolic closure, where I say, okay, this is bigger than me. Because I see that there is no way out. I see that the forest is more and more threatened. I see that territorial conflicts are more and more important, and that these groups of human beings don't have a possibility to survive in these circumstances. Thank you. I think this is interesting because it is a personal tale and a way to do a political fight. Working with your personal knowledge, you decided to take on a political fight for the rights of these peoples using your abilities of journalist. But this is a very difficult fight where some situations are repeated, and I think this is interesting. You often say, I keep rewriting the same story, and these people keep living in the same conditions, and it is difficult to give a voice to these human beings. So I have a question. You have used this topic of visibility and invisibility. You insist on this topic, and you insist on the way the concept of invisibility is expressed. Who are the Ocultados of the forest? Because you said that there is a problem of context. All the Amazon nations from Latin America, so Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, and Brazil, develop a project and the countries, the ending countries in the forest and in the coast, and then the Amazon. So the Amazon for these Andean countries is like the east, and for the Brazilian is the west. But there's a practice for which this part of the world isn't seen. And in the Amazon world, some things are invisible. Only the invisible people see them. Can you delve onto this topic of the invisibles of the forest, which concerns your second chapter, which is very interesting because it summarizes your work on invisibility? Sure, Marco, Massimo, it's a pleasure. As I was saying earlier, a president used to say that the East is a myth, and somehow from that moment onward, the Amazon has become faraway territory, unless when its natural resources need to be exploited. There was a slogan which said that Ecuador is an Amazon country, and when you get to the Amazon forest, you realize that no one knows what it is. Sorry, I'm saying many asides. When I was traveling in this area of the world, everyone asked me, how did you get so far? There were several flights at a certain moment where there was the oil boom, and everyone was asking me as if I was traveling to unknown countries. So only recently we started talking more about this topic. The Amazon peoples have been made invisible. So when people push for the civilization of this land, people talk about a land without humans, for humans without land. So other people from the Ecuatorian area are invited to colonize these territories where, according to popular opinion, no one will live. Talking about isolated groups, there are several reasons why they are made invisible. The state makes them invisible because there's this idea for which there's this land very rich of resources, extensive. People think it's infinite and vast, and but in this green ocean, these populations are not seen. They're not seen because people don't want to see them. That's why I always stress the topic of invisibility and invisibilization of these human groups. And I always stress how they are ignored and hidden, not only by the state, but by other players of society. In these 30 years, we had several meetings with these groups that have met other players, for example, families, with oil workers, for example, or other people who got to those territories. And I always reported these meetings, in particular focusing on the experiences of the missionaries which who had more contacts with these people. However, the authorities say no, there's no, with no one, we never met anyone. They have no identity documents. In the slaughter of 2003, they found burned bodies, but law enforcement said there's nothing telling us that this is from a person from Ecuador. They don't have IDs. So rather than the inability to see what is in the forest, there's a systemized strategy aiming at hiding what is happening so that the mining activities happening in these territories are not disturbed. In my book, I also consider various invisibilization, for example, the massacre of 2013, when there was this massacre. Big spears were found, 2-meter long spears with feathers and with waste that were found in the forest, for example, candy wrappers. But the institutions always doubted that there was someone behind these spears. They said they come from artisanal shops. So institutions didn't want to see something that was clear. I also talk about many events of invisibilization. For example, during the 2013 massacre, they called a lot of witnesses to give testimony. These people, what did they do? They called the press, but the reports were seized, the pictures were seized, and they started intimidating all the people who somehow could have brought a real testimony of what had happened. Then there are other examples of invisibilization. For example, in 2009, these groups attacked a woman. This woman had been attacked and she had been hit. And when the investigations were made on this death, they analyzed the blood found on the spears, and the report said allegedly human blood. So probably these spears had been taken out of her body. But rather than analyzing, for example, all the elements of these spears that could prove the proximity to these people, because these elements said there was something more, the authorities only said, yes, human blood was found without giving any other specific details. Naturally, it was human blood. It had been taken out of the body of a person who had been found dead in the forest. So I think there are various evidences proving this invisibilization. And in the book, I'm also quite critical concerning the job carried out by environmentalists and NGOs, because there's this mindset. People think about these peoples are free peoples living in this extensive and vast forest without threats, but this means narrowing the problem down, because I repeat, these groups are fully displaced from their territories. They're always running away, and this is not recognized by anyone. That's why I call them hidden population. It's not their voluntary decision. These are not groups living in perfect harmony with nature, but were constantly running because they hear a noise in the forest, because there are the noises of the machines that wash the gold in the Amazon. So they keep running. So I don't think it's their intention to be isolated, but quite the opposite. They live in a territory that doesn't allow them to live in harmony with nature. They try to run away and establish a place to stop. So before continuing, those who are following this presentation, for those who are following this presentation, I would like to help you see what we're talking about, which place we're talking about. We are a couple of maps to geolocate better the situation. Sorry, I'm struggling with Zoom. I need to share screen. Here you see, you can locate Ecuador. This is the Pacific coast of Latin America, South America, and you see that Ecuador is this country. On the right, you see in red the oil mining sites. And this is the area of our interest. This is a map that shows in black the new definition of intangible areas. In yellow, the old definition. And then, excuse me. And then another line here. According to Ecuador law, no oil mining should be carried out here. But actually, people keep mining oil to protect these, even if I should protect these invisible populations. These crosses show all the little accidents, and then in fuchsia, you see our proposal we presented as Padua University to the Ministry of Environment of Ecuador. We had consultations with experts, and this could be a new intangible area for these populations. Because these populations tend to be nomadic. Because the concept of border is typical of the government, but these populations over the years have moved to the north or to the south. So this fuchsia line delimits a protection area which would allow these populations to move and to live in peace. But of course, defining a new intangible area would mean to block the oil extraction activities, not just in the Yazuni, but elsewhere as well. Before moving on to the next question, I would like to say one more thing. In March 2013, three natives died from the lynching of a group. Before the end of the month, the families entered the forest to revenge the death, killing other people and raping two children. It was the first time that for the state authorities, the presence of these people in the forest was recognized because of the presence of these two young victims. Aside from this, after this event, a Kafkian trial started, which is also described in the book by our author. And that's why I give back the floor to her about this very sensitive topic, because the Ecuadorian population recognizes the existence of these populations because of these raped girls in the forest. So you describe very well how the state deals with this topic, talking in your book about a Kafkian trial. It's a very difficult thing to explain, because there was this massacre in 2013. So these bodies were found, and the family of the victims goes looking for revenge. This is one of the many times where initially there was silence until I published the book of the tragedy, hidden tragedy, because it was said that yes, maybe allegedly these girls were found, but no authority and the press dared to get there and to document and to prove the facts. So it sounded like it was hearsay. But when the book is published and I explain what happened, because these peoples are soldier peoples. So when they went to revenge the death of their families, they took pictures. And there was an actual photo documentation of the attack of the houses. So we told this story, and when it was revealed, because it couldn't remain hidden, then the state eventually decided to investigate. So 8 months after the facts, when the forest had already eaten all the evidence, after months, they get to the alleged crime scene. Of course, we are not certain. And what do they find? They find a sort of pan holding with a hole, and a very difficult trial starts for these peoples, because they didn't know what was happening legally, because they had the obligation to revenge the death of their own. But what happens? The state starts treating the issue and starts a trial against these peoples. A terrifying trial starts. They are accused of genocide. This is the first accusation. They didn't even know what this word meant, the word genocide. So they didn't even understand what they were accused of. These populations do not even speak Spanish, and they didn't understand what they were accused of. So one of them is arrested, they are taken away from their community. The families needed to travel 2 days to get to them. They needed a lawyer, and the lawyer asked for more money. And since this is a warrior population, half the population is arrested, is put in jail, and the other half hides in the forest. And women are left alone without the men, only with the children and a lot of debts to pay. And a very long trial that they don't understand. Then they release one, not the other. And all this goes on for approximately 8 years. To the final judgment. First, they wanted to hold the trial in a jurisdiction than another, so applicable law wasn't clear, and during the hearing, the accused do not know what they're accused of, they don't understand what is happening, they don't have the possibility to defend themselves. They have a translator who doesn't speak their language. So this translator doesn't understand the legal terms. So after these years, we get to a sentence that somehow makes people laugh, not to cry, because it was expected. The judgment said that an intercultural party should have been organized. So after this judgment that arrives 8 years later, it is a sort of celebration to please the victims or to establish a sort of alliance, but without the victims. At the party, the representatives of the other people weren't invited because they were still isolated. But the entire situation was surreal. And these people always behaved as soldiers. When there's a war, there are no murders. First, they were accused of genocide and then homicide. But these were warriors, soldiers who were there to do their mission. No one from the state tried to pacify, to create peace. So if these people attack a house of Ecuatorian families, the state should have responded for their represented. But the state didn't do it. They didn't give compensation for the death of their grandfathers, and then they gave a judgment that had no logic and no understanding of what was going on in these communities. So I didn't understand. So they were overwhelmed by the behaviors of the state. So if a thief enter your home, you hope that they will return what they stole, whereas these people didn't return, and all these hearings didn't have any support. And the image I have of this event is a colonial event. I've seen some pictures where there are these indigenous populations fought in cages. So for me, this trial was just a show of a state that tried to civilize them by hitting them with a stick. This is the situation. It's a very colonial image that doesn't fit with our century. When these people were put in jail, they didn't know the law. They said, had we understood these deaths, we would have used the same weapons to respond. But there are no equal weapons. There are more powerful armies than others, or more powerful weapons than others. So if these peoples were using rifles, well, this happens in all wars. There's always an inequality of weapons. But the state asked these peoples to fight on level ground, but this is crazy because each people uses the weapons they have. So we get to the legal problem here, and during the trial, the state had favored the exploitation of this territory and the colonization of this territory, favoring the contact of these peoples. So that's why I call the trial a Kafkian trial. The state washed its hands of it, and the burden of the law would have been on the peoples and not on the state that didn't act to somehow investigate on the death of the elderlies. After the trial, then the Inter-American courts took over, But the same happens here. 2 years have passed since this judgment, and in inter-American courts, we don't get to any type of resolution. As for the 2003 massacre, 21 years have gone by already, and in this case, we're still waiting for a resolution of the case. I think that this trial thanks to the media, gave the Ecuatorian society the possibility to ask questions about the Amazon forest, and this can be called colonization of power. The state promotes colonization, but on the Amazon forest, it applies different modes. For example, it declared the presence of a civil war to make life easier for the army to justify the massacre, because if there is no civil war, the rule of law provides for accountability of someone for a murder. Otherwise, in a warlike situation, the response is different. It's interesting to see this situation of 10 years ago in the light of what is going on now in Ecuador, a state that wants to protect its army, but that makes life harder for the weaker. In this process of complicating the life of the weaker people, there's also the topic of international restitution. There is an Inter-American Commission for Human Rights that has been set up because some Ecuadorian citizens have submitted the case of Ocultados to the courts, and the courts were called to investigate the responsibility of the state. These trials are very long right now. We're discussing facts and events of 2013. So the violation of rights when appealing international bodies requires resistance from these populations. As part of what has been going on recently, can you tell us something, Milagros? I can talk about a missed opportunity of the Inter-American Commission, and there are several reasons. Because what Ecuador did as a state was establishing a legal basis to look like everything is going well. Because in the Constitution of Ecuador, there is an article talking about the defense of these peoples, Article 57, and then the state submitted documentation to the Inter-American Commission. So there is a protection policy, there are protocols. For oil company. So on paper, it looks like the state has done a lot. I call it the paper forest because there is a lot of information, and on paper it looks like Ecuador is one of the most advanced countries in terms of legal protection of these populations, but this doesn't happen. And those who submitted this appeal again versus the state didn't follow up because they didn't add any other data from the data of the oil companies, the data from other documents and official data. But they don't talk about anything more. They didn't investigate anymore. I joined one of these hearings and I read about these papers. The applicants couldn't prove that the intangible area isn't fulfilled, isn't met. What is on paper isn't complied with. It cannot prove that the communities are fully without protection, that the trial was a total failure. So basically, information is missing concerning one of the two parties of the trial. I think that the state is favored in this trial. Eventually, they will pat the Ecuatorian state on the back. It will be just thanked and congratulations will be given for everything it has done, but it hasn't done anything. But information is lacking. A part of the process is lacking, meaning the data and the statements of the parties that took legal action. There is another topic concerning a video where two things are said that the judges ignore. First, witness statement says that this person cannot return to their family because they don't belong to that setting, because this girl, so this is a statement by a girl living in a community. She says that she wants her family to keep living. And so this video with this statement is not so relevant maybe, but it tells us that irreversible processes have been triggered. And this girl couldn't return home 10 years later because otherwise she would be killed. And it's a reason for anguish for her. But for the first time, we see one of the people from this group appearing in court. So the presence of this girl is important, but her witness statement is just set aside. No one asked for more information about her. Her story is not represented or protected. For me, this is part of that hiding process. We're talking about an over 18 girl, and her life is over, and no one is doing anything. And then there's the case of a woman who lives now in a community. She has contacts with her community of origin, but she had to live in hiding. And her community of origin, sorry, the community where she lives now is a tourist resort. And her family doesn't want her to meet anyone outside the community. So this girl cannot make decisions for her own life. She is subject to judgment that doesn't allow her to be free, with a violation of her rights. The other girl, so the ministry separated the two girls. The younger keeps living in the place where she had been attacked by the guerrilleros in 2003. But she was younger, so she adapted to her community of destination. However, the other girl was older and she couldn't adapt. And the state says that they took her under their wing. But as I explained, she lives under the protection of the state, but she's actually isolated. And for me, it's another form of invisibility, because no one did anything, not even an anthropological scientific attempt to try to understand the origins of the girls.
And that is because if we do not know how they move, where they're going, how many of them are there, it's difficult to protect them. Given the fact that they had more knowledge, we don't know if it was intentional or not, but this occurred nonetheless against these people. These people received no support from the state. And what happened was the project of life was cut down. They had no contacts at all. It's a situation where they had to get out of the Western lifestyle and live in their own house. And this also prevented them from participating into the communication with the rural communities. That person does not go to the parties of their own community. Is isolated in the welcoming community without any kind of relationship with anything else and anybody else. It's very sad and complicated. After this child was brought over there, then police and prosecutors intervened and trying to understand why the situation was like that. And the adopting parents reverted the situation. Thank you very much for telling us the stories of these two little girls that experienced a series of hardships and that are experiencing multiple identity because they have their origin identity, the welcoming identity of the new community, and their liberties and the rights are limited in this situation. I believe that the goal is trying to retrieve and find again and freedom and autonomy, a project of life that was just defined. Thank you very much now. And we don't talk anymore about this topic because we have much more to talk about. We want to get into the book and see other topics. We would like to move towards the conclusion by reading one of the last words of your book that says, the Ocultados are the people more vulnerable of the forest. There are no options of life for them. It's the end of conquest, after all. And this is the ending point of the history that during 20 years I've obsessively followed. It's now time to let it go. You told me that it's the last book you're writing on this issue. Now you want to write about poetry. Is it true? Is it something that has to do with your personal story in terms of politics, of commitment that you showed on a very complex issue in the Amazon forest? No, we don't want to ask you to write another book on this issue, but in your experience, what can you tell for all those people that want to try and begin to deal with this issue and that needs to keep struggling for this issue? You have done your job. Now other people must pick up your job and continue it. So what are you suggesting to all those people to try and manage this very complicated, difficult, and painful topic? Well, given the fact that I come from journalism, the first that I think about is that if you want to write on this issue, you can, of course, read documents, anything written on that, but you should also go to the forest and listen a lot. I believe it is time to work on this issue out of the common places. I've seen many papers, many texts that unfortunately keep putting under the highlights what we have always heard about. And I think that we should look at this topic beyond the bias, without racism, because I think there is a lot of that as well around this topic. And I invite people that want to research on those peoples to walk through the forest, walk among the peoples. Hopefully, somebody can also speak with them. And with some of the people I've mentioned today, I think some of the children I mentioned are 18 or 21 years old now. So maybe it's the right time to give voice to those former child I mentioned. Excuse me? Do you hear me? Something happened. There are some technical difficulties. But we continue. Okay. Hopefully, eventually, somebody can listen to the story of Ponta. What else can I tell you? I feel that the destination of these people is to disappear. We have to understand how and when. In 2013, we took pictures after all the judgments that happened and what happened in the forest so that people could remember what happened. Anyway, I feel that this last book was written with a bit of rage and helplessness, but I hope it remains as a piece of testimony. It's more than anything else a personal history that recaps all the bibliography we have on the issue. And I hope it can be another brick in the next 20 years or something of history on that. And I hope the same doesn't happen for the peoples in Brazil, where the last survivors are still there, isolated, sleeping on an hammock. And I think there's the risk of losing it all, of losing all these stories, because there is still chance for protection and survival in the forest. It's important that the forest is not completely demolished, not by the oil extractors, because I think we are moving away from that. We are after the oil age, but the mining is really what is choking the Amazon forest in the Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil areas. So I hope some other people can be the defenders of the forest, and we can hopefully demand from the state a protection of these people and of the forest that do not comply to the laws. This is a good reference point, but what we see is that we are still testimonies to a massacre. Thank you very much. In these last years, you've mentioned in your book, we have been drinking coffees, we have been holding many conversations with you, Miguel Angel, and other people about what could be a possible land of living together. We have published a tiny book in 2018 on Yasuni, and some reflections, we made them today, but I would like to mention them again. There are 9 priorities we mentioned as possibilities of living together, coexisting. One element is thinking that there are no intangible people, but only in mobility. Those people move, of course, they are not stable. So there is no fixed area where people are. There is mobility. And this is something we have to take into account. And then the fact that the contact exists, because as you mentioned, there are noise in the forest, noise of the engines, of the generators, of the torches, of the lumbermen, of the polluted waters and soil. So, of course, there is a form of contact that mediated, in a way, the situation, and we must take that into account, because the pollution of the natural resources is a form of getting into contact in a problematic way. And then it's important to give visibility to the intangible, because on many maps, they are not present. It's important to visualize it. For example, when you say that this issue requires you to visit the Amazon forest, that's the point, because when you visit the Amazon forest, you have no information, no paper telling you to be careful because of that. You're in an intangible area. You can meet uncontacted people. So this is an invisibilization of some sort on the maps and on the soil. You have to think that all the territories are complex. So we need multi-level governance, keeping into account all the diversities here ever more than ever. So the rights of these peoples must be part of the land management. And then we have to learn to coexist in this territory plurality. How can we live with peoples of this kind? What can we do to create a land that is more shaped towards that? Bibliography helps us, of course, with the relevations, with the camps, of course, to see what's happening in the forest, but also areas for respect and compensations as well. Aruani live there, but it's not only them, also farmers. They must be paid because of some things that can happen to them in order to guarantee their survival and, of course, the transition away from oil extraction. The referendum, the Yasuni, was good with its result, but we have to do all we can. We have to stop the oil extraction in the Amazon forest, starting from the most sensible areas of the uncontacted peoples. We still are seeing in the Yasuni Park the extraction of oil. This is not acceptable. And of course, the farming activities in those areas must be taken into account as well. It's very important. Now I'd like to ask you a couple of questions that came from the participants. The first one, what's the vision of the Ecuadorian people of this situation? Are there people still denying the existence of these people? Yes. You are a journalist, so you have a shared vision of what pertains to this issue. You manage relations with media, and do you know if there are still people thinking that there's nobody over there? Or there is a new theory, everybody is dead now. That's the other theory. So what's the attitude of people towards this issue? I think it's the same as before. What I mean is that in terms of the referendum of Yasuni, I think young people participated, so there's a bit more sensibility towards the issue. So a good job was done in that sense. In terms of institutions, authorities, still lacking, because they're saying that there was nobody in the forest, so that's what we were saying to fight the referendum. Starting from the energy minister, he used to say that many, many times. They keep thinking there's no one there, everybody's already dead. And as you said, it's a complicated land, so I think it's paramount. That's something I think every time I go in the Amazon forest, and I worry about that. The thing is that the neighboring communities, the Aurani, for example, and the Colons, they are experiencing situations that are ever more precarious and difficult. I've seen petitions of communities that require food, basically. There are Guarani populations that have no food. They cannot move to other places, so they're isolated. They are fixed. They're fixed houses. They are not moving around the country, but still they do not have access to food. And this is a very risky situation, even more for people living in the forest, the people that are isolated in the forest. Because if the neighboring peoples are not feeling well, they will never be well. So there are many other areas neighboring that are seeing other issues such as drug trafficking. And this is another huge issue. There are camps for timber extraction and for any other kind of extraction. And this is putting a huge pressure on the territory. And the idea sometimes comes up that there are no noise of killing, no people that tells us of the killing. Still, we need investigations. Sometimes there's a rumor of a killing, and we have to research on that to understand if it's true. Still, they keep putting the people invisible. And we are getting a bit more sensibilization, but still we require a lot of work. Well, thank you very much for that, because we're talking about invisible land, usually. So it's important to give them importance by being there and having reports, journalism, activism, supporting the organizations, and of course, investigations. Second question, do you think that some international actors could play an important role in the protection of these peoples, or is it something only internal to each country and an internal issue? So Brazil must deal with it, and Peru must deal with it, Ecuador, but there cannot be any international control, international protection. I think there are isolated experiences, maybe. Once, Funai did a lot of work in Brazil for the indigenous people, because the Ecuadorian experience have been of protection and was not a coordinated work with the indigenous people. It was imposed from above. They tried to have Guarani as guards for the parks, but they require also training and so on. But I think that the issues are common in the Peruvian and Brazilian and Ecuadorian forests. The Amazon is more or less the same. So I think that, yes, some international work is important on that. However, the specificity of the Ecuadorian forest is that it's very small. You could think that because of that, it's easier. Maybe in Brazil, it's larger, but in Ecuador, it's smaller, and it's getting even smaller. And it's polluted and thick land as well. So that's what's making it difficult. And as I was saying earlier, the most important thing is that if you think about territory where you must coexist, if there are no clear policies of intervention, of improvement of the life quality of the people living there, this is necessarily going to have an impact on the fact that the peoples are fighting against each other to defend their own livelihood. Thank you very much. I really hope that this presentation can spark some curiosity and to have people read the book. Those books can be found online in PDF, can be purchased. We recommend everybody to get deeper into the issue by reading them. I don't know if you, Milagro, want to give a last message, last consideration, because we thank you also so much for your presence and for sharing your time with us. Well, nothing. I would like just to thank you and thank all the participants. As I was telling you, this is a symbolic closing for me on this issue. I would like to call attention to the issue. Seeing all the work that has been done on proposals on intangible zones and the territorial governance that I think always lead towards protection. Hopefully, from your work, we could have more political influence as well. This would be very good. I think that we still have chances. Sometimes I'm struck by pessimism and I feel helpless. And I think this is the end of it all. But there are still people interested in Yasuni and the protection of the environment and the change of model. As long as the model is not changing, the situation remains complicated. The issue is that I see some more complications arising because of the difficult situation that is present in Ecuador, where there are many priorities except for this. So we must try our best to work on that, because it's a long way up. It's an uphill struggle. And we must involve the government despite the change of politicians. It's an unstable democracy as well. So this makes it even more difficult. It's hard to protect the peoples. I see that we are getting closer to the end of it all, but I hope I'm wrong. So I would like to just thank you so much for the presentation and for being present here to talk about the Ocultados. And the publishing is in PDF, and it's a physical book as well. It's a small book, with a lot of emotional charge in it. It's very strong, I admit it. But I think that's because it means so much to me. And it means so much that there are people interested on this issue and want to have an insight. Thank you for sharing with us your book, your resource that you're telling to us, and hopefully can support people that want to face the issue. Thanks to all the participants as well. We invite you all to find out more about that. The next event on this conferences of sustainable development in a context of high biodiversity and cultural diversity. The next event is on 3 Maya of Mexico. It's another critical situation. And I think that today, talking about Ocultados, we are talking about an important challenge for sustainability, because we have people that for thousands of years have been surviving in equilibrium with the forest and nature. It's an equilibrium, a balance that we're trying to study in the university to find it once again and learn from it. But we are losing those people. So this is the challenge that we must think about. Sometimes many people are not aware of the existence of these people, so we think that it's fantasy. But there are hundreds of cultures living, existing, fighting in that situation, fleeing from pressures that the society is giving on them. So thanks everybody again. Thank you to Milagro. And have a nice day or evening, depending where you are. I'm here in Colombia. Milagros is in Ecuador, and the others are in Italy. So good evening and good day. Thank you. See you.